Well, guys, hello. Thank you for coming to our capstone presentation. We're going to be analyzing the policy options to mitigate illegal tire pollution along the Anacostia River. My name is Allison. This is Morgan, Olivia, Monsool, Emma, and Roger, and we're really excited to share our presentation with you guys today. So, there we go. So quick overview on our project. We're going to be talking about our client, then go over our project overview, then discuss tire pollution in the Anacostia watershed, and then go over our research questions, which are the health and ecological impacts of tires, tire disposal and the causes of illegal tire disposal, and current tire dumping laws in DC. And then go over our methodology and the summary of our interview findings. And then finally, we'll go over our policy options, our criteria, our matrix, and finally, our recommendation.
So throughout this whole project, we worked with a client. This is a little bit about our client. Our client was Anacostia Riverkeeper. They're a great organization in DC that protect and restore the Anacostia River. They create opportunities for people to enjoy, learn about, and care for the river, and they do this through cleanups and water quality monitoring and boat tours to educate people about how important this river is and show them how they can enjoy it. So a little overview about our project. We first assessed the extent of tire pollution in the Anacostia River. We did this through data that we initially got from Anacostia Riverkeeper. We then conducted multiple days of interviews, academic research, and field research to get some primary data and get some understanding about the extent of this issue. We then compiled many different possible policy alternatives that can help solve this issue. We did this through all of the research and interviews and information that we got. And lastly, we determined that the DC government can implement a strategic plan to regulate and implement programming that can create effective change, and we will go into what that specifically is later on.
All right, and how we decided to focus on tire pollution is given cleanup data from the Anacostia Riverkeeper, we realized that this was one of the largest bulk pollutants in the river, and it was on the rise. It's a vastly under-researched topic. A lot of the programming put in place, as we'll find out later, has been discontinued. So it's really unregulated and very not well enforced, as opposed to other specific littering laws, such as plastic bags or plastic bottles. This receives very little attention. There's also very limited places in DC to bring discarded scrap tires. The general public is not very aware of what to do when they have tires that they'd like to dispose of. And this is a real danger to humans and animals. Having tires along the watershed can displace different habitats for species, and the additives can wash off into the water and decrease the water quality that impacts recreation and water and drinking water. So we started with trying to map exactly where the tires are being found in the Anacostia watershed. We had a couple limitations with this data collection, starting with the fact that we really only had three main resources: the cleanup records from the Anacostia Riverkeeper, our personal cleanups that we attended that the Anacostia Riverkeeper hosted, and then also we interviewed two citizens, Kent and Kelly Fothergill, who on a weekly basis for the last 3 years since they moved to Bladensburg, Maryland, have collected tires on their own. So we kind of aggregated this data together to figure out where exactly all the tires are being found. So as you can see, there's 327 found total in the southern part of Anacostia. That's the highest part of the heat map. But obviously, this is not a full picture of where all the tires are along the Anacostia, because they're just a lack of data.
So although there is a lot of research to be done for tire pollution, we kind of narrowed ours down to fit into these questions. So the research questions we did were, to what degree is there pollution from tires in the Anacostia watershed, and to what extent are the tires harmful to the ecosystem and to human life? What are the key causes of illegal tire disposal along the Anacostia? What policies, if any, are in place in the District of Columbia for addressing tire pollution? And what are the alternatives to reducing tire pollution in the Anacostia watershed? And then what are the pros and cons of those alternatives?
So these are just two graphs to kind of visually see tires and volunteers from Anacostia Riverkeeper's cleanups throughout the years. So the graph on the left, the blue bar, shows weight of tires in pounds from years 2015 to 2022, and the orange bar shows volunteers in count 2015 and 2022. So that kind of shows that even though there are varying volunteer counts, there are still a lot of tires that are found. that are in the environment at these cleanups. The graph on the right shows just average tire weights per volunteer per year. This just kind of to visually see how many tires each volunteer could theoretically be picking up from throughout these years, just to kind of see it in a different way.
So some health and ecological impacts of pollution to the Anacostia. It takes 50 to 80 years for a tire to actually decompose. So if one gets dumped, it'll be around for a long time. And then they can also release different things into the water, such as chemicals and additives used in manufacturing, such as synthetic rubbers and silica. And then also this chemical called 6-PPD, which has been shown to, it's like supposed to be a preventative for them deteriorating. But when it gets into the water, it's been shown to cause a lot of fish to get like disoriented and die. And they can also release microplastics into the water, and they can become ideal for mosquito and rodent breeding grounds due to holding standing water.
So this slide, we will be exploring more the waste tire disposal methods in DC, and then what's cause of the illegal tire dumpings in the DC. So waste tire is majority go to, as you can see from a chart, ground rubber and the tire derived fuel and landfill. Altogether, these three markets contains more than 75%, and majority of the tire disposals goes there. Currently, DC doesn't have any recycling center or any landfill. So what's happening is they do have a solid waste transfer stations named Fort Totten and Benning Road. And once the waste tires are collected on those transfer stations, the recycled waste tires are transferred to the Baltimore Elk Ridge, where they are categorized and then bundled and then piled to and ready to be sold in a second market. And whatever or not it is recycled is goes to Covanta, Lawton, Virginia, and they will be incinerated. And incinerated waste tires, once they incinerated, the incinerated ashes are dumped in the I-95 landfill in Lawton, Virginia. One of the very crucial part of the waste tire disposal method is the transportations. And track transportation is the main vehicle that transport the waste tires. And then it's heavily relies on a commercial licensed driver and diesel fuel. So what is actually causing the illegal tire disposal in DC? Our literal review, it's very common that the business private retail tire retailers and auto body shops and licensed haulers are the main causing the main illegal tires. What's really happening is currently the legal fee for disposals in the local market is per tire $3 to $20, but in the black market, it's cost $1 to $2. And basically, the logic behind is those small business tires, in order to avoid the little higher legal cost, they hire the unlicensed haulers, and unlicensed haulers ended up dumping, they illegally dump those waste tires. And majority of the times, those waste haulers pick Anacostia areas, the areas that pretty much wooded or isolated from their neighborhoods or near the highway shoulders. And also they commonly pick the ward of 7 and 8 communities, whose communities have a low income, and then minorities, majority of existing communities.
Yeah, so for a little bit more about current federal and DC tire dumping laws, there's currently no federal law regulation that applies directly to tire dumping. Instead, this is something that's been historically regulated by states. And there are some consistencies across states that we looked at through case studies, but there is a little bit of patchwork, and DC specifically doesn't have a comprehensive plan. The Anacostia River does have a TMDL for waste, but tires aren't actually counted as a part of that waste for monitoring purposes by the local governments. And again, the district-owned regulations clearly haven't been effective in tackling this problem, despite the fact that tire dumping is illegal. Typically, residents instead have to pay a $2 to $5 fee when dropping off a used or waste tire at a tire dealer, and people can pay more if they want a private hauler to come get their tires instead of dropping them off. The district does regulate tire dealers themselves. And tire dealers are required to maintain a license with the city and contract with a waste hauler. But it doesn't appear that a lot of the information on this is publicly available from the District of Columbia.
So this section, we will be exploring our methodology. The first we conducted, in order to do our methodology, we conducted literature reviews, based on what is causing illegal dumpings and then its related issues to the environmental and human health, and as well as the existing DC laws and regulations. And we collected more information from the observations and semi-structured interviews and secondary methods. And while during our observations, we were able to participate 2 main cleanups that is occurred in Burnt Mill East Special Park and Anacostia Park. We had a wonderful experience. Thank you so much. And then we conducted the semi-structured interviews. We interviewed 12 professionals from various fields. As you can see, their departments and organizations, and then the group logos are existing here. And then we collected more information from the secondary research, that materials collected from the various minerals. And based on the data collections, we gathered our findings, and based on our findings, we developed our policy alternatives and as well as criteria.
So the main themes of the interviews that we did was basically there is really insufficient funding and lack of enforcement for this illegal dumping. There's really no program or fund put in place that directly manages the dumping or encourages any recycling of these tires. And there's also only one disposal location that goes to the one recycling plant in manual tires. So this doesn't help regular citizens be able to go and dispose of tires easily. We did find that there are abundant amounts of watershed education throughout the DC area. The DOEE, along with Anacostia Riverkeeper and many other organizations, all sponsor really great programs that help K through 12 education regarding watersheds. So this isn't really a problem here.
Yeah, and again, there is no federal law that directly addresses this, and the TMDL doesn't actually count tires as solid waste. But in the early 2000s, there was a scrap tire work group at the EPA, but instead of trying to pass regulations, they mostly tried to create a model or program that a lot of states could implement and try to incentivize municipalities and private entities to recycle tires instead of leaving them out in the ecosystem or depositing them in landfills. But this scrap tire program was divested in 2014 for a lot of reasons, but probably the most important is that EPA mostly lost interest in trying to take care of this particular area. Similarly, there's no federal law right now that applies to the manufacturers themselves. So there's no cradle to grave or similar approach that forces tire producers to take responsibility for tires. And there's no requirement for them to track tires or take them back. Instead, this is up to states and municipalities to regulate, and DC has yet to implement its own comprehensive management plan to take care of this.
So through all of this, we developed 4 policy options plus a status quo. So it's a little rundown. The first status quo, it's basically just business as usual. The situation remains the same, and relying on current policies that may or may not be in place in DC. The second is a DC government action plan that is a $1 fee on new and used tire sales to fund a cleanup and enforcement program to increase cleanups of these tires and as well as increase deterrence. The third is an education program that is focused on educating consumers and tire distributors on consequences of tire dumping, how to avoid it, and emphasizing watershed education K through 12 to kind of instill this behavior of why it is bad to illegally dump tires in students of young ages. The fourth is an extended producer responsibility law that sets up a local tire producer responsibility organization, or a PRO program, to dispose of tires funded by a $3 fee levied on new tire sales. And the last is a tracking system that is a mechanism between the generator, hauler, and facility to monitor the flow of used and waste and scrap tires and detect illegal dumping.
Okay, for our criteria section, we used weighted scoring model. A weighted scoring model has two main components. The first one is a weighting criteria, and second one is scoring criteria. For weighting criteria, we selected 4 categories. The first one of cost minimization, which is we weigh the 40%. Its intention is to measure its ability to reduce disease tire pollution at the minimum cost as possible. And that criteria is also including the component. Who is bearing the cost? Is that the consumer or business or government? And then if this policy needs additional fundings, it needs to maintain additional costs needed to maintain. And then the second criteria is effectiveness. We weighted as 30%, intended to measure the possibility of a decrease in the pollution in DC, but core important component that must be including is making sure it addressing the environmental justice that's concerning along the Anacostia River. And the third one is a political feasibility and legality. We weighted a 15%. Basically, it's a measurement for is it have a chance to be passed and approved by the DC administration and then decision makers. And also part of it is also including the legal barriers if there's any. And then last but not least, the criteria sustainability, which we weighted the 15%. And we just want to see like if the policy alternative is able to sustain a longer period of time, preferably over 5 years. And then including the components, if it's need the additional staffing and funding every year. The second component is a scoring criteria. We rank the policy, the score from 1 to 5. 1 is being the lowest and 5 being the highest.
So based on those criteria that Monksville just shared, we evaluated every policy option using them. The first one that we have is sticking to the status quo, which is not taking any policy action, and it's relying on policies currently in place. So for sustainability, it scores a low because there is a current tire pollution issue in the Anacostia, and it's kind of unsustainable to not implement any policy action because the issue will remain the same. For cost minimization, it scores a medium because there is no additional cost to remain with the status quo. However, it costs money in cleanup efforts for materials, people's time devoted to it, and hauler fees. Effectiveness, it scores a low because not implementing any new methods won't reduce any current tire dumping, and it won't reduce any tire dumping in the future. And then for political feasibility and legality, it gets a medium high. Because sticking with the status quo, it won't cause any political or legal objections. But if there were to be adequacy to reduce tire pollution, it could alter political feasibility.
So the second policy option is the DC government action plan. So basically this plan just revolves around increased cleanups and enforcement and deterrence. So illegal dumpers do not repeat that offense. Takes a $1 fee on new and used tires to fund a different tire fund that will be money to go to helping cleanups run better and increasing enforcement, and develop a task force of previously incarcerated people that can help run these cleanups and monitor areas of high illegal dumping. So based on all this, for sustainability, this plan ranked a high. It initially needs staffing and funding from the government before this tire fund gains traction and is enforced. But after about a year of the money gaining its own fund, it will be long-term and can sustain its own funding and staff without any outside help. Cost minimization ranked a medium high. Like I said, there is a high startup cost, but again, after the first year, it will not need any additional money, so it can sustain itself with its own funds.
So the next criteria is effectiveness, and we rated this as a medium high. And we rated this because there's an emphasis on addressing enforcement and cleanup. And it will create deterrence and more cleanup programs. And there's also this focus on Ward 7 and Ward 8. There are mandatory scrap tire drop-off days that must happen in Ward 7 and 8. and mandatory cleanups in that region, as well as the task force that Olivia mentioned earlier. So we also have political feasibility in reality, and we scored that as a 5. And we did this because similar policies have been successful around the country in other states and jurisdictions, and we don't see that this policy will face any legal complications or political issues.
And then for the third policy option, we are proposing a sort of education program that operates more as a certification program. So we want to educate tire retailers about the dangers of going with uncertified haulers and how unregulated tire dumping can have ecological consequences. And then once these retailers participate in this program, they will receive the certification. And then consumers for the second part will be educated on this program and be promoted to shop from certified retailers. So this way they are having more conscious consuming behaviors. So for sustainability, this really depends on just proper record keeping and consistent staffing. So make sure that those retailers that do go through the program are able to maintain their certification. And then the funding is there so that the staff is able to run the trainings and so on. The cost minimization, it has lower cost than other policy alternatives because you're really just paying to implement the curriculum and then to maintain the staff. There really is no new staff or anything that probably would need to be onboarded for this. It would just be a part of the DOE's regular day-to-day. For effectiveness, it doesn't really address the root cause of the problem. It doesn't create any more disposal locations, but it will hopefully deter retailers from going with unlicensed haulers, which could help reduce the problem. And it really depends on just behavioral change of consumers and retailers. For political feasibility and legality, it is rated medium high. There really should be no or very little contention with this. The main issue would most likely come from retailers that don't want to have to A, compete in this program, or B, compete with other retailers that do have the certification and could be having greater success because consumers prefer the retailers with the certification.
So our fourth policy option is an extended producer responsibility law. And essentially this would force producers that sell tires in the district to take care of the disposal of those tires. There are a lot of different models to accomplish this, but the most common is what's called a producer take back. Essentially what I just said, the producer must facilitate the disposal or recycling of the product at the end of its life. And usually producers that are attempting to comply with an EPR rule will set up what's called a producer responsibility organization, or a PRO. And that helps them pool resources to comply with the new law or regulation. And usually this is something that's encouraged by the states or municipalities passing an EPR regulation to help with compliance. Luckily in DC, we already have another model for an EPR rule in that DC has its paint stewardship law, and Paint Care is our PRO, which is national and has a wing here in DC. I'd be happy to discuss that more in detail later on. But moving on to our criteria here, for sustainability, we actually scored this medium low for a couple of very specific reasons. While there is a low staffing requirement for the DC government in the long term, and there's no requirement for new funding after the PRO is created, theoretically it should be self-sustaining. The fact that the PRO is run by private entities can set up some strange incentives that might incentivize it not disposing of tires in the most environmentally friendly or compliant manner. So there has to be continued monitoring of the PRO and its activities to ensure that the tires are being disposed of properly, and that requires staffing and reapprovals for funding. And given that those aren't necessarily guaranteed, this score is relatively low in this criteria. For cost minimization, this also scores medium low. There are going to be high initial costs to the District of Columbia to set up the collection system and a lag in time for the PRO during which it's not receiving the full fund. But then after a certain point, those costs are passed on to the consumer via the $3 levy fee on purchase of a new tire. And again, assuming this average of around $3, the fee imposed can independently finance the PRO in its operations after that, but that was not going to apply to cleanups and illegal dumping. Moving on to effectiveness, this also scored medium high in effectiveness. There is the possibility of an extremely high rate of recovery of new tires being sold to at the end of their life after a certain lag period. A successful program countrywide in Belgium managed to recover 86% of new tires sold after a certain point. But again, this, aside from changing when this cost is passed on to the consumer, this doesn't really close off all of the illegal dumping problem. And there's no provision for cleaning up tires that are currently in the ecosystem. So there's going to be a gap in what the EPR rule can realistically cover. For political feasibility and legality, this is also going to score medium high. Again, there's already an EPR rule in existence in DC, and the popularity of EPR spreading. States such as Maine, Massachusetts, and California are, these rules are gaining a lot of traction there. But there is a complication. This proposal will impose a relatively high fee on consumers at the first point of sale of tires, so it could face opposition because of that.
All right, last but not least, policy alternative number 5. It's a tracking system. So I just want to quickly remind you what it's all about. The tracking system's core mechanism is able to track the waste tire movements between the tire dealers and the haulers and end-use facilities. And for sustainability criteria, we scored it a high 5 because once it started implementing, it's able to hold a really long time, over the 10 years. And during that time, it doesn't need any additional staffing and fundings. And cost minimization, we scored medium, high 4. There's 2 components involved with that. The first is it's need a little bit, it needs the extra fundings just to launch it, but once it's kicked off, it's highly ability to reduce the administration cost over the years. And the second component is the waste tire haulers registration. Once the waste tire needs to, it's a requirement to register, but part of the registration is it needs to be bonded $10,000. And then $10,000 is intended to safeguard the obligee, which is in this case the state and then the public, if they've been a victim of the tire pollutions. Well, what is $10,000 really translating to the financial term related to the waste tire, right? So according to our estimation, we estimated it's able to cover the cost of up to $500 illegally tired illegally disposed tires along the Anacostia River. And for that, we scored a 4 for cost minimization for the alternative. And effectiveness, we scored medium 3. Yes, it has a high chance to help the law enforcement to track the waste tire movements, and then able to find the location of the generators. But it's a little bit negative side of it is if the surrounding neighborhood states doesn't have the equal tracking system, it's very hard to just, track it. That's kind of like a little bit in disadvantages of that alternative. So for that reason, we scored 3. And political feasibility and legality, we scored medium to low, because since 2017, DC politics has been very resistant to change. And then it wasn't being enthusiastic about promoting development of the solid waste, including the tires. And also besides that, in order to be successfully implement the tracking system, DC needs more legal requirements for the alternative.
So this is our policy matrix with all of our alternatives weighted and compared to each other. As you can see, the DC government action plan did weigh the highest amongst all of them, and then Allison will explain why.
Okay, yeah, so our recommendation is the DC Government Action Plan. As Eva said, it did score highest on our matrix. One thing to note is the matrix is only a rough metric for policy evaluation, but we still are confident that this will be the best policy for a couple of reasons. So This action plan comes at the issue from multiple angles, from both cleanups and enforcement, which will encourage better tire management and will be self-sufficient from this fund. And this policy framework has been successful in other states, like Illinois and in Maryland. And it includes the specific environmental justice considerations with the mandatory cleanups in Ward 7 and Ward 8, and the designated dumping days in Ward 7 and Ward 8. It did score relatively high on cost minimization. There will be that high startup cost, but after that first year, it will be self-funding for as long as we need it. And in some case in the future, like in Maryland, they brought down their price of their fee. So if this becomes less of an issue down the road, we can lower that fee. Another reason that this makes it such a great policy option is it can include a lot of the policies that we talked about. It can include an education component as well. So that is our recommendation, and that is our presentation. Any questions? Yes.
Have anyone on the phone?